Hello, and thank you for joining us in the Continuing the Conversation studio. Continuing the Conversation, or CTC, is an arts and education network founded and organized by alumni from the Arts and Education program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Our goal is to provide spaces for conversations that are important to advancing work in the arts and education sector, and to get as many people as we can across sectors engaged in these conversations. You can join in today by commenting on our website, aieconversation.org, or by tweeting with the hashtag AIECTCchat. I'm Eliza Greenberg. I'm a co-chair of CTC and an alumna of the AIE program, and I'm really excited to welcome our guests to discuss our topic, the character of our profession. We're joined in the studio by Varina, who is a alumna of the Arts and Education program and executive director of American Youth Symphony in Los Angeles. And we're also joined by Maya, who's a student in the Arts and Education program at Harvard and a graduate student teacher at the Harvard Art Museums. And they're both joining us from California today. And as always, we're joined by Steve Seidel, the director of the Arts and Education program. And Steve, I'm going to hand it off to you to get the conversation started.
Great. Thank you, Eliza. So I'm happy to be part of this conversation today. I'm actually today also on the West Coast with Varina and Maya, leaving Eliza alone on the East Coast. But very happy to be discussing this because this is a topic that is pretty near and dear to my heart. So we've called this session "The Character of Our Profession," looking inside the hearts and minds of arts educators. And the framing question that we've chosen for this session today is, what kind of professional development would make you the arts educator you want to be, and would make others the kinds of arts educators you want to see? So we talk in this context about habits of heart and mind. Clearly there's always work to be done in developing the kinds of skills and knowledge that we need as arts educators. But there's also a question of character, a question of what values we bring, how we make those values visible in our work and in our relationships with others, and so on, that kind of define our character and the way that we carry ourselves, the way that we go about and do our work. So I'm very excited that both Varina and Maya are with us today to open this up. As always in these studio chats, we like to take this time to sort of put out a bunch of ideas, offer them to each other here on the chat, but also to you listening as thought provocations. We're interested in your ideas and where you take this topic. But we think this is an important topic, and one that is, in a sense, always part of our conversation as arts educators, as we try to figure out how to do what we do as well as we possibly can. So I wanted to turn first to Varina and ask you, you're running a pretty large organization now in Los Angeles, and you have lots of people that you work with, both within your organization and in the partnerships that your organization is engaged in. So, I know that on some level, whether you use this language or not, you're thinking about the question of who are we? Who am I? Who are we as colleagues? And are we the best we can be? Really, are we the characters we want to be? So I'd like to hand it over to you, Varina, and then we'll turn to Maya and we'll go back and forth for a bit.
Well, thank you, Steve. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way to frame it, which is the question of who are we, and I think you get a lot of sense of who you are given context. One of the first thing I do when I take on a job as the executive director is I have to look at where are the other organizations that are doing comparable work to what we're doing, and how do we fit into this equation of whatever community we're in. You know, my community is Los Angeles, so it's pretty big, and so asking, you know, who are we serving? How are we doing it? Are we doing it in the best possible quality? And I think that where habits of heart and mind come in professional development is a sort of habit of inspiration, so that you're continually making sure that everyone that is serving the constituents in a community is inspired to do the best quality work they can do. I mean, that's a big part of my job. I also have to do the same thing with anybody that works with me on an administrative staff level. I feel very strongly that people don't do their best if they aren't feeling inspired about the mission, about their work environment. And it's very difficult to stay inspired if you're in your own little silo. So you constantly have to keep a habit of checking in on who are we in relationship to, and fill in the blank. And so professional development for people who are in arts education, I think, is vital in that regard. It's also, in my opinion, a pretty rapidly changing world out there. So just staying abreast of what's happening and who's doing it. You know, a lot of brain science research coming out, and I think in the past 10 years, the advancements in understanding the quality of how to deliver arts education, a lot of it due to you, Steve, and the study you guys did at Project Zero. And then the other aspect of, you know, like just on a personal level, I mentioned to you before, was I happened to luck into a professional development program that was called Courage to Lead, and it's based on Parker Palmer's original work of Courage to Teach. And its sole purpose was it would get a bunch of administrators together of nonprofits and remind them of why they were doing what they were doing, and it literally involved most of it an art form to get us to do that. We would do poetry, we would take walks in nature and do mantras. We did dance, silent, you know, pantomime dance. I was trying to get administrators back in their body, back in their heart, and then dialoguing in communion with other people doing what they do about what originally inspired us to do this work, which can be rather stressful and get you in your brain more than in your heart and your body often.
Fantastic. So that was chock-a-block full of ideas. That was terrific. Why don't I not try to do any kind of summary, though I do totally appreciate your opening up. I mean, I think when I use the language of heart and mind, it's to remember it's to bring the emotional and the deeply felt reasons why we do the work, right, back into the conversation. Let's pick up on that a little bit. But you also reminded us the importance of just being the embodied nature of this work. That it's the whole body, not just the heart. So Maya, let's turn to you and see what you'd like to add at this point.
Okay, I thank you for allowing me to join this conversation. So I'm in a unique position, I think, coming into my first year of graduate work after 8 years in the field of teaching. I was noting the moment that you are an executive or an administrator and you kind of lose that inspiration, because I think as teachers, most of our inspiration comes from our students. And I was in a heavily administrative role, and so coming to that moment where actually my students, who I had taught years before, were challenging me in return. And that's a beautiful moment when they're able to actually ask the questions that I was asking of them back to me, with the question of what do you want to do with your life? Where do you see your direction going? And I said, this is my work. This is what I want to do. I want to be with students and help guide you into the people that you want to see for yourselves in the world. And they said, but you're so capable of so much more. And I said, oh, okay. So that led me on this journey of this, like, my direction of my role and my soul kind of thing that I've been balancing. And I think for me, there was this disconnect of being back in the arts and being being a part of that world and that community of inspiration, I was really needing, I think, as a professional to come back to school to really foster the habits of mind and intellectual engagement, to really understand theoretically what I was seeing on the ground. And so I think for us as educators, it's really important to kind of use our field experience and then reconnect back to our communities of where we learned, and kind of get some grounding for us to bring back to our students who originally inspired us. And I've been thinking a lot about, I think, just my daily practices being back in school. It's a very unique world where we have this huge level of responsibility to kind of design our own framework. I was in a space where I was logged for my time from about 10 until 8 or 9, and now there's this openness. And so I've been looking at my own daily practices and thinking about how those are actually impacting my work in school, trying to kind of write and contribute to this field of education, but also just thinking about my work in terms of students. I think I always want to come back to that original inspiration of working for them. So, few thoughts.
Fabulous. You know, what's one of the things that you touched on, a lot of things, Maya, but one of the things that's striking to me is that both you and Varina really started your comments about with questions of inspiration. What inspires you, and what's your responsibility to inspire? And Maya, you were locating that in your interactions with students. And Varina, you know, it's you said and Varina said when we so many of us start our work in arts education in direct contact with students, but many of us also move away from that in time, which has always seemed to me one of the cruel dimensions of this, of a quote-unquote career trajectory, is that so often the career trajectory takes us further away from our direct contact with students, but also from our inspiration, really, as you both have named it. I love the idea of the habit of inspiration, and I think that even when we are staying in direct relationship with students for a long time. I taught high school theater for almost 18 years. The challenge of remaining inspired and, in a sense, reconnecting with inspiration was really huge. And I'm wondering how each of you does that, sees others doing it. Are there any people who you look at who are further along in their careers and who inspire you with the ways that they stay inspired? But I think it's worth spending a little bit more time right now on this question of inspiration, where it comes from, how we do it, how we go about inspiring others, etc. And maybe one other thing is just art, and Maya, you triggered this. Art is part of what has always inspired those of us in this field. And how do we reconnect with that if we're not in a daily practice of making or engaging with art? So who wants to pick up on that?
I'll go. What I like about that, Steve, is actually, as all things are, it's lovely to have this conversation right now, because I don't have a habit of inspiration per se. Like, it kind of has been happening haphazard, where I'll go to the theater because I get invited, or I actually get very inspired by the work that the American Youth Symphony does. So going to art concerts, or before, when I worked at another organization, I would see the kids in rehearsal practicing the plays they were writing. And then the little dribs and drabs here and there in my just going along with my life. But you got me thinking about how important it is. So many people write New Year's resolutions about getting physically fit or losing 10 pounds, or I'm going to do this year. And I thought, how great would it be if my 2015, my sole resolution is to form a habit of inspiration? Because I imagine it incorporates exercise and meditation and other habits that I am constantly telling myself. But if I put it all under the umbrella of inspiration, that just feels so much more generous and enjoyable. And I do think that you can lose ground in your job, and for myself, administering other people, in my personal life and well-being, if I don't see it as a habit, and I haven't. So I really appreciate this.
I mean, I think for me, I'm in this, I'm in school, so it's a beautifully inspired space. And it's almost like overwhelming I feel myself getting a little bit jaded by the level of inspiration I'm able to access on a daily basis. So the practice of just really being present for those moments, and I think a large part of that is actually just rest and removal, so then I can become re-engaged once again. And I think that in that balance of both being like at this height of inspiration by all of these beautiful ideas or challenging moments or community of engaged scholars or even students just seeing things for the first time, it's also helpful to kind of be almost a little bit in isolation. I think the practice of meditation is almost balancing in that moment of being so inspired. So I try to do both of those. I'm also just constantly inspired by my own experience growing up, by Beth Burns, who was one of my inspiration pages that I recently wrote about. But just the length of time that it takes to actually impact a community, and working in the community for about 30 years to really try to propel dance education forward, and doing a pretty amazing job. So I always think that although I've worked in this field for 8 years, I still have every day that is a new day for me to kind of grow and do more work.
You're so right, Maya. I realize now the most inspired I ever was that year at the Master's in the Arts and Education program at Harvard. I mean, you're right. You're absolutely right. It's funny to hear you, because I can remember there was no issue with inspiration that year. But then, when you get out and then you take a job and you get into the daily slog of delivering what you've just been inspired to do, there is a certain moment, which I recall about now, where you kind of go, okay, let me remember and connect back with what all was happening that year.
Well,
I think being in the field, it's also helpful to just take those moments to kind of know when you're giving inspiration and then receiving inspiration. So I'm always connecting back to my community to see who's being inspired at the moment, to then riff off of their energy.
Yeah, nice. It's I'm very I feel always very moved by what the sort of the phenomenon that Varina was talking about, the way in which the dailiness of a job and the pressures of all of that tend to, and the long, I mean, there's a connection for me, Maya, between what you were talking about, which is the reminder of the long haul that so much of our work is, right? Whether it's, honestly, whether it's trying to help a young person find their path, whether it's trying to build an organization, whether it's trying to change the culture in a district and the way that it carries itself, and whether it's trying to change the society, and it's daily work. But finding I mean, Maya, this is part of what, from our earlier conversations, I've been found very helpful, the idea that we need to identify daily rituals, and in this conversation to think about daily rituals of inspiration. When you were talking before, I had the incredible good fortune to go to be in San Francisco a couple of days ago, and to go to Alcatraz Island, the former prison which is now an art gallery, really. I mean, there are lots of people who come for the history of the island, but there were thousands of people coming the day that I was there to go to the exhibition that Ai Weiwei, the Chinese activist artist, has had installed on the island. And if the exhibition wasn't inspiring enough to me, And I mean inspiring both in the sense of possibility, well, certainly in the sense of possibility. There was also, of course, a school group on the trip, on the same boat that I came on, and there were about 25 high school age students and 3 or 4 different teachers with them. And I watched them through the day, in addition to watching to taking in the exhibition. And it was challenging, because I felt like, how do you make the most of this exhibition? And it made me want to go back and recommit to my own work, because in all honesty, I didn't feel like the people who had produced this exhibition and the people who were bringing these young people had really figured it out yet, how to really go the distance with everything that Ai Weiwei and his colleagues were offering us in this remarkable work of art. So it was very inspiring in that sense. So I just put that out as the inspiration can be in front of you all the time, really. And the question is how to remember to access it, to engage with it, to look for it. So maybe it's time for some last thoughts, and maybe let's go to Maya this time, and then Varina, and then we'll go back to Eliza.
Well, I've actually been thinking in our conversations a lot about the act of daily ritual and the act that the ritual act puts onto our habits. What it means to actually just look at something with new eyes and to awaken the senses and to really consider every element that goes into producing. For me, it's my cup of coffee each morning. But it really does, just looking at it in this way of holding the beans, thinking and considering about where they come from, pressing my own coffee and hearing the kettle sort of ring so I can actually make it, and smelling my cup and then drinking it. It's just this one little moment, but it actually impacts the reality of my day for the moments that follow it. And I think as artists, we're in this unique place as educators because we have this daily practice, whatever our art form is. For me, it was dance. But the act of continuing to practice and to go in each day with that intention that something new is going to emerge from the work that is so daily, and then eventually perform something that creates a dialogue to the audience that actually communicates an emotional experience. And I think that's sort of the habit of heart and mind when we're considering what we're doing in our mind mentally, but also connecting it to our heart a little bit more. It actually has an emotional reaction that authentically communicates, I think, what we're trying to do in the world. So those are my closing thoughts.
And Varina?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, what just sprang to mind when I was hearing that is I remember in our class talking a lot about framework. And what surfaces a lot for me in my particular field right now, presenting classical music concerts, one of the things that is a sort of a buzz word and an approach is thinking of context. So you don't just deliver a concert anymore. You deliver it in the context of a season of concerts or a season of exploration and, in a sense, inspiring your audience. And it's guided a little bit more than it has been in the past, where you would kind of just take every concert as its own little silo. And so the words framework and context for me weren't anything that I was thinking before this call in terms of inspiration. You know, I think it was, I trusted that things would come in my life that inspire me, and I completely relate with Maya's moment in the morning of that ritual of a coffee, and I think that's why a lot of Americans in particular love our coffee, because there is such a beautiful ritual to it. And like she said, the arts, in a sense, have a long entrenched history of delivering a societal ritual, and the attending of the performing arts experience, or the sitting down and the creating of the art form itself. And I think as artists, there's a framework and a context that you have every day, because otherwise the art doesn't get created. But as educators, and specifically I know I'm talking right now as an administrator, that framework and that context of inspiration can get lost. And I think that on a personal level, but also connecting to the source of what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it. I believe arts education administrators and arts educators are doing so because they have personally experienced and witnessed the profound impact that arts and arts education can have on a person's being. And so to be vigilant in a sense of creating a framework where that happens, even if you're not an artist. Like I would not consider myself an artist anymore. I don't partake in an art form on a regular basis. So I have always been thinking of it in terms of, well, do I start taking up my guitar again? I mean, I kept wondering what was the thing that would make me feel that again, that I so believe in and got me on this path that I'm on. But I completely am inspired by not looking at it that way anymore and looking at it as a framework or context of inspiration in my day. I think that's beautiful, and I thank you for inviting me to this call.
So I think the last thought that I would like to share is also about this notion, Varina, of context, and I'll pick up on the morning coffee, which for me is tea. My coffee is tea, but I identify and love, Maya, the way that you articulated that, because you can, you can make your coffee in a kind of mindless way, but you can also really attend and think. And I appreciate the question of, where do these beans come from, and what has it taken to for so many people and for the earth itself to make this moment happen. For me, my morning tea and my reading of the newspaper are inseparable, really. There's a little tea time before the newspaper, but mostly these things become one. And for me, Varina, the context of daily work is in direct relationship to both what's being reported and what's not being reported in the newspaper. Which is the context of the larger world and the events that are happening. And I feel like one of the, I'm very imperfect in my practice of this ritual, but the connecting of my reading of the paper, so most immediately on my mind right now, of course, are the grand jury decisions in Ferguson and Staten Island. And to ask myself, what does this have to do? What's the connection between these decisions and what I'm going to do today? And vice versa. Does anything I do reflect, respond, change this level of reality? Short-term, long-term, medium-term. To me, that is actually a practice of context, of considering context, but also a practice of inspiration. So this is, I feel just what you feel, Varina. It's just so happy to be in this conversation. I want to thank you, Varina. I haven't seen you for so long. It's great to see you. And Maya, I'll see you in a week or two, I'm guessing. And Eliza, I'll let you take us out, but not without saying that I hope that everyone has safe and healthy and happy time in the next number of weeks, and as we get into the new year, and maybe this conversation will help people reframe what they think about and what they do with those kind of wacky New Year's resolutions that we all make. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks. I think this is definitely going to reinvent my morning and my rituals in the morning, and I've definitely been inspired by this conversation. So we can all go to this conversation for our inspiration. So thanks, everyone, for joining us today, and be sure to head over to aieconversation.org to add your comments and continue what we've spoken about today, and please spread the word about our conversations. We'll be back in the studio in January, and we look forward to seeing everybody then, and have a happy new year. Thank you.
Thank you.